What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, and we are back for another episode. We are coming to you live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. Hope everybody's having an awesome Wednesday right now. That's the current date, Wednesday, July 27th, to be specific. But really excited to hop into another episode. I am joined today by my good friend Spencer McLaughlin. He is the host of the Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12 podcasts. I got an episode that we just recorded earlier today, so it's kind of like a double dose of Spencer for me. But really excited to hop into this episode and talk some more Ducks. How we doing, man?
We're doing just dandy. I know that you published this out as going to start at 4:15, and we're just like ever so slightly behind that. You can blame me because I was eating croutons and watching the Mariners.
No worries, man. Hey, I've definitely been getting back into baseball a lot more. That was like my first love when it comes to sports. Growing up, and I actually stopped playing after the 8th grade. Got into swimming. So that
Swimming, that's a weird jump. That's not a jump you see. I went from baseball to golf. Both of them involve, swinging something. Baseball to swimming. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that was it's kind of a random, experiment. I think one of my buddies, he had swam previously and he convinced me to try it out. So you got to try new things. I met some great buddies through that. And it's a very unique sport that I have a big appreciation for now that I didn't have before. So that's pretty cool. But we're here to talk some Duck football. Today we're going to be talking about the defensive players that we think are primed to break out for Dan Lanning and the Ducks this upcoming season in 2022. If you guys haven't already watched or listened to the previous episode where I went very in depth on the offensive players I think are going to break out this year, definitely go back and listen to that. You can find that on my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres, and you can also find it on the podcasting platform of your choice. So with all that being said, let's get into it, Spencer. What do you think?
You asked for my first breakout player candidate on defense this year.
I was kind of just saying we should get the show going, but you can start with your guy if you want.
I think there are a number of directions you can go with guys who are poised to break out, so to speak. And I think the name at the top of the list is someone who I was talking about on a recent episode of Locked On Ducks, and that's Justin Flowe. And I think that it's a little bit different when you're talking about breakout stars to mention a guy like Flowe, who's already been on campus for 2 years, and we kind of know what he can be, but we haven't seen him play really at all. I mean, he didn't play at all at his true freshman season in the COVID year, if I remember correctly, because he got injured. Did he even play in one?
Just one game. It was in a special teams role, but
GoDucks.com
says
exactly.
1 game.
So he didn't really do anything there, unfortunately. And then he got hurt again last year, and now he comes into his third year, and he's played in 2 or 3 college football games, and he's a preseason All Pac-12 second team nominee by the Pac-12 media members. And I think that's telling to the sort of potential that he has. And at the linebacker position, he can be just an absolute game wrecker. And it's really unfortunate that we've missed 2 seasons of him. And I hope that we're going to get a healthy one this year. That's just a lot of finger crossing at this point, unfortunately. But if he's healthy for an entire year, I think you're going to look at him and very quickly put him in the same category with Noah Sewell as guys who are first round NFL talents. And so he'd be my number one choice from that standpoint. Again, not a totally traditional pick because we know that he's capable of being very, very good. But outside of that, I'd look in the secondary on the back end at a guy maybe like Triquez Bridges, who's gone back and forth between corner and safety, is now back to the position he was recruited at when he initially committed to the Ducks under the previous administration. I think those are 2 guys who should really have opportunities to play a lot of football and play very well. And I like different things about them, but Flowe in particular, if he is healthy for an entire year, I mean, it could be, just constant Twitter highlight material. I mean, he's that sort of player. I remember one of his high school highlights was him, hitting a running back in the hole, picking him up and just throwing him on the ground like a rag doll. And I have never seen that before from a linebacker. He's a different sort of guy. And Mikey G is right. All gas, no brakes. And that's the sort of player he is. So I hope he's the breakout star we talk about as the season goes on, because I think that that's as good of a linebacker tandem as you're going to find in the country. And you pair that with Dan Lanning, who knows what to do with linebackers, who can play around the line of scrimmage, but in coverage as well. I think that's a guy who I would really love to see have a big time breakout 2022 campaign.
Yeah, let's stay on Flowe and kind of just go player by player and do some back and forth there as we work our way through this roster. So for Justin Flowe, yeah, he was right at the top of my list. It almost feels in a way like he kind of broke out just because the one game that we saw him play was so phenomenal. 14 total tackles, tackle for loss, forced fumble, and then he got Pac-12 Freshman of the Week honors in that game against Fresno State, but definitely had his fair share of injuries since he got to the college level, which is a bummer. Keep in mind, this is the second highest rated commit ever in Oregon football history,
Yeah.
trailing only Kayvon Thibodeau. Thibodeau is 9987 and Justin Flowe is 9967. So he's right on the tail of Thibodeau there. Nice little alliteration for you. But this is also someone who won the Butkus Award in high school, coming out of Upland in 2019 as a senior. I think I could probably confidently say I've been covering Oregon recruiting for 3-4 years now. I can pretty confidently say that there's no single player whose high school highlights I've watched as many times as Justin Flowe.
Oh, 100%.
The dude just plays like a guy who is absolutely possessed. I know Tosh Lapoy was saying in the spring when they were trying to work him into some drills, he was in trainers for the entirety of spring practice. And for people who don't know what that is, it's like, it's a flat shoe that doesn't let you grip the ground like cleats do. So he wasn't padded for most of spring. Actually, I think he was padded, but he wasn't. They were just limiting what he was going through. I remember in one of the last practices that was open to the media, we saw him kind of flying around and getting involved in some 11-on-11. The fastball drill is what they call it. So then that kind of led people to believe, okay, are we going to get to see him finally in the spring game? But I think the staff really made the right call there, dialing it back. Tosh Lapoy was talking about how it's kind of hard to tell him to slow down because he only has one mode and it's go, go, go. But yeah, for Oregon to really take that next step as a defense, I think having a tandem like Sewell and Flowe is definitely going to take them a long way. Those are going to be two of the best run stuffers I think you see in the Pac-12. If we do get to see Flowe, for a full season. And I think that he just embodies that swagger, that nastiness, that beast mode that you want to have on defense. And then certainly, kind of I don't want to say second in command, but it feels like this is Noah Sewell's defense going into 2022. He is the face of the defense, but to have a guy like Flowe that you could put alongside him would be a pretty scary combo.
Yeah, I agree that Sewell's the clear number one. It's really been his defense, I think, for the last couple of years. I remember when he got on campus and started playing as a true freshman. I remember saying to a friend of mine who I was watching a game with, I'm not so sure that Noah Sewell isn't our best defender on the field outside of Thibodeau. And I think that was unquestionably true because he's everywhere and they're both just heat-seeking missiles. I think the only guy whose high school highlight reel for Oregon commits all time would be as viewed as Justin Flowe's, or at least on that sort of excitement level, would be DeAnthony Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, on the other side of the ball, I think you're certainly looking at Flowe as the best high school highlight reel package on the defensive side. But I'd be remiss if I didn't point out DeAnthony because his high school highlights are pretty awesome. His college highlight reel is arguably even better. He's just got the play with Washington State and all of that. But I think those two are just Sewell and Flowe. That is just such a versatile dynamic. They're not like a Troy Dye who was an outstanding player. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would take Troy Dye as my middle linebacker on any team, unless I also had Noah Sewell as an option. In which case, if I had to choose, I'll take Noah Sewell there. But Dye was a guy who was, on the smaller side, kind of made it work being undersized. Joe Walker was kind of that way as well. I think Dye was actually a touch smaller than Joe Walker was. But what these guys have is they have that big size, but they have the speed to go with it. And that's what makes them such tantalizing prospects for the NFL, because they are big enough to be able to withstand hits, take on blocks, drive guys backwards, but they also have the speed to go sideline to sideline. And I'd like to answer Gerard's question here in the comment section. And by the way, ask away. He said, given Lanning's reputation and success, see last year's NFL first round draft, they had 5 players taken there, 15 total. No matter how good of a season Flowe has, wouldn't it make sense for Flowe to stay one more year under Lanning? I think if he's healthy, I don't know that it would make a ton of sense. Like, can you grow as a player? Yes. But if Justin Flowe is healthy for an entire season, he's the sort of player I think we all suspect that is going to pop immediately, right? The way that Kayvon Thibodeau sort of did, where he's just making an immediate impact. He's everywhere, putting up really great stats, and you see the physical traits and everything is there in place. And so, yeah, he can always develop because he hasn't played a lot of football if he were to stay another season. But given his injury history, I don't think that would be particularly likely, because you would risk getting hurt again, and after 2 injuries in college, if you potentially add a third to that, or just the possibility of it, I think he opens himself up to kind of a Nakobe Dean situation where he falls in the draft, and yeah, he'd still get taken for sure. But if he has a full season where he stays healthy, it's going to be hard for NFL draft scouts to let him go, I think, beyond the second round, frankly. And that's a pretty good place to be. So I understand where you're coming from with that question. And like from from the standpoint of becoming the most well-rounded player you can and get the most coaching you can before you go to the NFL, it would make sense in that sense. But on the whole, him doing what is best for his professional career, if he's healthy for an entire season, then I think he will explode. I think he'll be an absolute monster, and that it'll make sense for him to go to the NFL. But I think the way that we would get him back for another season is actually not what I would prefer to have happen. And that's if he has, a minor injury here and there, because maybe his mindset then is, I need to show the NFL draft community that I'm capable of staying healthy for a full season, because that's something that is very, very much taken into account by drafts and GMs and coaches in the National Football League. So I hope that doesn't happen. I hope we get a full season of Justin Flowe, and he has, however many hundreds of tackles or something, and some sacks and big momentum shifting plays, highlight reel hits, and all of that. And it's, disappointing that we may only get one season of it, but I'd rather have it in full this year and maximize his impact on Oregon's ability to win this year than, have him for 7 games or so and then have him back, but he's battling injuries again.
Yeah, it's a unique situation with Flowe just because we've seen so little of him, but he came to Oregon in the class of 2020, so he could technically take that leap to the NFL after just one full season at Oregon. I guess full season or not, if he wanted to after this year, he could at least try it. But I think that is what makes it such a unique deal, because the brand of football that he plays is just someone who's so willing to put their body on the line for their team, and to just play a really violent brand of football. And occasionally that'll lead to injury. So I think you hit the nail on the head as far as it just kind of makes sense, I think, for him to leave if he were to have a really strong season. But I know selfishly from the Oregon perspective, you'd probably want to get him back for another year. So I kind of see what Gerard's saying here about, staying one more year to get developed. But at the same time, he was someone who came to Oregon, he came to Eugene just so college ready already. Like, he doesn't need his body to mature and develop like maybe some of these other linebackers do that have come to Oregon. He's someone that I think is ready to play from a physical standpoint right now. Now in 2022, we got to see, I want to be looking for, some of those, what's between the ears kind of plays. How is he reading the offense? What does his anticipation look like? Is he able to move well enough in coverage to keep up with, the occasional running back? or wide receiver? How does he cover tight ends? Like some of those questions, I think, is what we're going to be looking for to see kind of if he is ready to take that next step, because the brand of football he plays, like I said, is just so violent. And I think that that's what people want to focus on. But you really want to see that maturity from, a leadership standpoint, and then just making the right play, the football IQ play, just being there at the right time.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing on this, and then we can move on. He is unique in the sense that he can have just one full good season and then be a high round NFL draft pick. Most guys, I'd say, are not like that, because I tend to be of the mindset that it's better to stay another year if you're looking like a mid to late round pick, or you might not get drafted, or there's still more ways you can develop, like a Mikael Wright, for instance. I definitely thought he would get drafted, and a number of NFL draft people I talked to thought so as well, including Mel Kiper Jr. But I think that that's a guy who you look at and go, all right, I understand why he's leaving, but I really feel like he could benefit from another year. But he was not so physically ready at a position that demands physical preparedness. And Flowe's body is so unique, and he's so gifted in that sense that he's able to just, go out, put it on the field for one full season, and then be able to make that jump. Whereas most guys would have to develop, would have to grow, would have to maybe get in the weight room a little bit, or just get accustomed to the Power 5 level to be able to make that leap. But Flowe is unique in that sense. There are not a lot of guys where I'd come on here and say he just needs to show one full season and then he'll get drafted in the NFL. But he's that sort of physical talent.
All right, so Justin Flowe is leading off our list of potential breakout candidates for the Oregon defense in 2022. I'm going to go ahead and tackle the next one, bring this guy to the table, so to speak, in the conversation, and that's DJ Johnson, outside linebacker for the Ducks. Played both ways last year as a tight end as well, but we really saw him step up as a pass rusher, as an edge guy, because Kayvon Thibodeau got hurt, and then it looked like they were trying to get him more involved on defense, and now he's going to be full-time defense heading into this season. That's what it's looking like. I remember Tosh Lupoi was saying, once he got the job and he was getting a good feel for the roster, he met DJ, he got to know him a little bit, got to see what he was all about, and he was saying that's a guy that's playing defense. Like, as long as Lanning lets me have him for defense, then I'm all for it. So I think that it's probably a little bit unrealistic to say that we think that he's going to fill the shoes of Kayvon Thibodeau, but at the same time, he's that kind of a caliber of player, Spencer. This guy had about every offer you could think of coming out of high school, out of the Sacramento area, before he went to Miami and then came over to Oregon. I think the athleticism that he has, just the physical hands that he has, I think we're going to look to see if he can develop some more pass rushing moves. I think this is an awesome move for him just to focus on one position solely for the 2022 season. And he's got a great coach that can coach him up, whether it be Lupoi, his position coach, or Lanning, who worked with, I believe, the outside linebackers or the linebackers at Georgia as well. I think that that all kind of just sets the stage for a big breakout year for Johnson. And, man, they're going to need him.
They definitely will, because that edge position and getting after the quarterback, I think, is probably the biggest weakness for this defense going into 2022. Unfortunately, I think on the whole, when you look at the caliber recruit that DJ Johnson was and the physical traits he possesses, because he kept going back and forth and had to out of necessity. I remember after the spring game coming on my show and asking the question, like, well, why the hell was that guy ever playing offense? And then I thought back to, oh yeah, there were just so many injuries there that he had to, right? That was out of positional necessity, and he did that very well. But I think what he lost there, getting all those reps on offense, not just in games, but in practice as well, is the ability to fully develop and reach his maximum potential as a player on the defensive side of the ball. Because think about Kayvon Thibodeau. When he was a freshman, my friend and I used to joke about this all the time. Whenever it was third down, you were watching Thibodeau, seeing if he could get to the quarterback. But he had like one move, really, right? By the end of his freshman year, he was starting to develop a little bit more. But by his third year, Thibodeau had an array of moves. Now, he still needs to develop that more in the NFL, according to NFL draft analysts, to really reach his full potential. But he was a different more well-rounded, more balanced player, more versatile player by the time he had been playing defensive end for 3 years than when he first got to campus. And so I think that's what DJ Johnson has missed here. And hopefully, this new coaching staff can work with him and help him get closer to that ceiling. But I think that because he had to spend that time at tight end because of attrition within the Oregon football program, it was something that ultimately you can look at and say might have held him back a little. He could still be a good player this year and rack up some sacks, but I don't think that, compared to the sort of player he was coming out of high school and the way we would have talked about him back then if we'd both been having our shows, but that was so long ago that I didn't even know who you were, and nor you me. And so I think that we would have talked about him as a guy who, like, oh, is he going to be, our best defensive end player, or is he going to, lead our team in sacks, because he was that sort of recruit and he has those sorts of physical traits. But if you aren't getting all those reps in the game, if you aren't getting all those reps at practice because you're working on the other side of the ball, I think it limits your upside on either particular side. Doesn't mean you're not still bringing value, right? He has done a lot of great things for the Oregon football program, but I think that is why he's been good. But I think he had the potential to be great, but he had to go back and forth, and that held him back a bit.
Yeah, and he's someone who showed up when the Ducks needed him most last year, namely in that Ohio State game. I mean, the Ohio State game was a really good game for the Oregon's offense, but I feel like CJ Stroud had all the time in the world to sit
Yep.
back and process in that game. But DJ Johnson was someone that was responsible for one of just 2 sacks, I believe. I think Braden Swinson was the other guy who got the sack in that game. So
They weren't till late. They weren't till later in the game either. I don't think DJ played a ton on defense in that game. He did at the end. He was mostly playing tight end. But your point is well taken that there was no pressure on CJ Stroud.
yeah, so and I think especially Kayvon Thibodeau didn't play in that game, but this kind of goes into a previous story that I wrote for Ducks Digest, just about 3 ways the Oregon defense can grow next year, and I think that's just developing not only a consistent pass rush overall as a defense, but multiple guys that are capable of rushing the passer. Because I think there were numerous times last year when you saw some opponents that just doubled KT, and then they were basically saying, okay, make someone else beat us and get to the quarterback. And more often than not, Oregon really wasn't getting to the quarterback, or they were getting really close, but they weren't finishing plays. So I think finishing plays could be another thing that they really need to focus on growing in 2022 to ultimately get the most out of this defense. And that's, I think, one of the biggest, to-do list items for this new staff, because there's so much untapped potential on the defensive side of the ball right now. But fortunately for Oregon, they didn't lose too many key pieces up front, other than, of course, Kayvon. They do have some youth in the secondary that I'm sure we're going to be talking about later on in this one. I do want to get to a break really soon, Spencer, but is there any other final remarks that you wanted to make here on DJ Johnson as a breakout guy?
I wonder how DJ Johnson and maybe Justin Flowe will be utilized in the pass rush and kind of where they play. How much Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupo, I want to move them around, because both have the physical traits to rush, to try and get after the quarterback from the outside, from the inside, wrapping around. I think that, the way they're used in stunts or delayed blitzes will be really interesting to watch.
No doubt about it. So we're going to see what DJ Johnson can do for the Ducks here in 2022. We're going to step aside for those listening on podcast for a quick break. Don't go anywhere, though. We have more Oregon football for you on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Ducks Dish Podcast. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Ducks Dish Podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, talking with Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12. We're talking about the breakout players for Oregon's defense in 2022. We just got finished talking about Justin Flowe and DJ Johnson. So I'm going to go ahead and, Spencer, how about you give me your next guy on the list for potential breakout?
I'll go back to the secondary again, and I don't know if it's the most conventional breakout, but I think that he's a guy who could really take a leap forward with a great defensive staff. And that's the most sure bet in the secondary. And I know there are a lot of questions over there in the secondary. I promise we will get to them because I have questions about the secondary too. But the one guy I don't is Christian Gonzalez, who has put together a couple of nice seasons in Boulder with the Buffs. He's still got his DB coach in Demetrius Martin coming over. Now he's got Dan Lanning and Matt Powledge and Tosh Lupoy in the fold, coaching him up as well. And their reputations are pretty well established in that sense, in developing guys who are not just all conference but all American caliber players. Matt Powledge coached Jalen Petrie over at Baylor, who was an all American NFL draft pick. I think Gonzalez can be the anchor of the secondary this year, and frankly, I think Oregon needs him to be that. But physically, he's got great traits, and he's got some good instincts as well. He's experienced, and that's not something we have a ton of in the secondary, especially on the back end. Guys like Bennett Williams and Jamal Hill, definitely experienced, but they're kind of sub package guys who will be on the field plenty, and we'll see them playing for the Ducks this year for sure. But if you're talking about just a base 4-3 defense, you're probably not going to have either Bennett Williams or Jamal Hill on the field, unless maybe they want to have Bennett play free safety. But I think he's a little big to do that, and you need a guy who's a little bit rangier to replace Verone McKinley. But I think Gonzalez is the sort of guy who can really be that clear number one corner. And we'll see whether or not he moves around or if he likes a particular side of the field. But I really think that he and Dante Manning, to a lesser extent, can be guys that really pop in the secondary this year. And I think the Ducks are going to need that because safety is a big question mark.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you said that you think that you could kind of see Christian Gonzalez as the anchor of that secondary. Because for me, going into the year at least, I kind of view Bennett Williams as that anchor guy because he's someone who's been at Oregon for a number of years and he's already performed at a high level at Oregon. But we just really haven't necessarily seen it from Christian Gonzalez yet in an Oregon uniform, for that matter. But I think he's definitely going to be leading the cornerback group as the oldest guy in that room, the most experienced guy in that room. Definitely played really well at Colorado. Another big thing that stands out for him. So he started all 12 games at cornerback last year, finished 5th on the team and 1st among DBs for the Buffs with 53 total tackles. And he also led the team with 5 pass breakups, which I think is something you really want to see from a corner, right? Because it shows they have good ball skills, good instincts, and they're a disruptive force in the passing game, which is something Oregon desperately needs. Because I just feel like their passing defense wasn't that great if they weren't.
Some of that was scheme. Some of
Sure.
that was scheme. You had DJ James and Mikhail Wright, and James was little inconsistent, and Wright was pretty darn good. But I think a lot of the reasons that their pass defense struggled last year was scheme oriented.
Sure, and that's absolutely a valid point because I know I saw a lot of fans with some qualms about the scheme, namely in how much space the corners were giving guys off the line. So I think you really want to just establish that physical nature, especially as a secondary, as a defensive back. But yeah, like what I was saying with that point about the secondary, not really the passing defense, not really being that great unless they were generating turnovers, and that was something that they did at a really high rate early in the year. But then they battled some injuries. Kayvon Thibodeau went down for a bit. Bennett Williams went out for the season, and that kind of just it showed that it was hard for them to get over that hurdle, I think, and be that consistent force that they wanted to be, turning the ball over as a defense. But another thing with Gonzalez that stands out is he was 3rd on Colorado with 5.5 tackles for loss. So maybe we'll see Demetrius Martin, send him on some cornerback blitzes to catch the offensive line off guard, out of position maybe. But he's a pretty big defensive back. I believe he's 6'2" in the neighborhood of 200 pounds. So, if that guy gets ahead of steam, that's not a small dude running at you, looking to knock you on your butt and, mix things up in the backfield. So I think that'd be awesome if we could see him get involved there as well, rushing the passer a bit.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'm really looking forward to with regards to the defense this year is how does it look compared to last year? You don't have the exact same group of guys, but you have a lot of the same guys, right? Noah Sewell's there, Popo and Dorless are there. Your DBs are probably going to be at the corner position, arguably better or at least they should be, than they were a season ago. I think safety, you might take a little bit of a step back with no Verone McKinley. It'll probably be a significant step back with no Verone McKinley, because he was certainly the captain in the secondary a season ago. But a couple of people have asked questions about Dante Manning, and I wanted to get to him too, because I had him
Sure.
somebody on the radar as,
Me too.
a potential breakout guy. And honestly, I can't figure it out. I can't figure out why. Like, we all see the same thing. He has not been what he was supposed to be when he committed to Oregon as a 5-star. I'm pretty sure he's the highest rated defensive back to ever commit to the Ducks in the recruiting rankings. I couldn't tell you what hasn't clicked for him, but in the times where he's getting beaten, Mikael Wright, I thought, took a step back in 2021 and got beaten some one-on-one situations, but sometimes the receiver was making a competitive catch over him, like Trevon Bradford did in the game against Oregon State there to end the regular season. I think there were a couple times like that, a couple other times he got picked off, but Dante Manning, when he gets beat, man, he looks lost out there. And I can't explain that. And the reason I've got some hope that he could break out this year is because he's got a new coaching staff. And whatever was, happening with regards to the dynamic between the secondary and the coaches last year, and the scheme was not working for Dante Manning, because he has, he hasn't made any big plays in his time at Oregon. And, as a corner, sometimes it's good to not hear from a guy for a while, because that means they're not targeting. But I feel like Dante Manning was thrown at all the time. And there was not a time last year where, Manning, I felt, was the best DB that Oregon had on the field. And that's what he was supposed to be. And, the question of, does he step up this year? I hope so, but I just don't know. For some guys, the light never goes on. I mean, there's a jump going from high school to college, no matter where you played your high school football. And, there's no rhyme or reason to when it doesn't work for a guy who, by all intents purposes, should be a really good college football player. And Manning could still become that, but I have no indication, right? Everything I'm saying with regards to the coaching relationship and scheme, that's a hope, because I haven't seen anything. He hasn't shown anything on the field so far to indicate he's going to be that player that he, made Oregon fans excited about, because he certainly hasn't been that. And he hasn't even been on the field at all times. I mean, last year, he wasn't even one of Oregon's primary starting corners. Right, it was mostly Mikael Wright and DJ James, and Dante played plenty. It's not as if he was never on the field, but if you had to give me a moment to pick Oregon's best secondary at any point in time during the season, it probably would have been the 4 guys we saw often, which is Verone, and I would have liked to have seen Jeffrey Bossa at strong safety, and they used him at linebacker. He's a little of both, but McKinley, and I would have put Wright and James at the corners most likely, because those are the dudes that I trusted the most. So I would really like to see him take that step forward, because it'd be big for the defense. And, the secondary also is more about communication than I think any other position group, probably on either side of the ball. Maybe offensive line you could put in there, but when you're running zone coverage, you have to know exactly where your brothers on the back end are at and where they're going to be. And if Manning is not able to fit the way that he or if he looks the way that he has the last couple of seasons, I think that'd be kind of disappointing, but ultimately not surprising based on what we've seen.
Yeah, and I think you make a lot of really valid points, and I don't want it to come off like, we're dogging the guy at all, or just, criticizing him a bunch. But I think that it's definitely a valid point, because you mentioned that he has seen the field a lot. I'm looking on his bio right now. He played 258 snaps on defense, so it wasn't like he didn't play. And I think that what was kind of surprising is that was before DJ James really asserted himself as, the number 2 corner. There was that battle between Dante Manning and Triquez Bridges. And then keep in mind, like we've already mentioned, Triquez Bridges didn't play cornerback in college, in high school rather. So the fact that he was able to, I kind of feel like he quote unquote won the battle, or was just playing a little bit more than Dante was in 2021. I feel like that kind of indicates a little bit about, where the staff was leaning, about who they were a little bit more confident in. But Dante has battled some injuries since he's been at Oregon. Did get dinged up in the spring, which was a bummer to see. But maybe he just needs, a little bit of a fresh start, and maybe Demetrius Martin will be that guy that can get it out of him and get to that next level in his game. We have about 10 minutes left, so there are some more guys that I wanted to talk about on this pod with you, Spencer. So one guy that I'm gonna point to next is in the interior of the defensive line, and that's Keon Ware-Hudson. I think that he's someone who's been at Oregon for a while now. Kind of got banged up. I think it was his shoulder, I want to say, late last year, and definitely missed the back end of the season. But I think he's someone who's played a lot of snaps, played a lot of college football, so you're not going to have to worry about him kind of adjusting to the speed of the game by any means. I think you're looking to see him work in tandem with Dorless and Sam Taimani, Jordan Riley, some of those other talents that they have, Popo in the trenches. I think that he's someone who's just really poised to take a big step forward this next year. I just saw a tweet earlier today about him training with Dorless in California. But I think that he's really got that NFL size that you want. I think he's approaching 300. I don't think he's a true 3 bills yet. But I would love to see him take a step forward as someone who can kind of thrive under Tony Tuioti and that D-line.
Well, he won't be short on competition for playing time, right? With the guys they brought in, like you mentioned, Jordan Riley and Casey Rogers from Nebraska. But then you've got Taimani, who was also one of the more solid interior defensive linemen last year. And then you have Popo and Brandon Dorless, who are definitely going to be the starter. Also, real quick, Andrew, if you're still watching out there, DJ James did indeed transfer to Auburn. That was our unofficial trade package. It was DJ James, Jason Jones, and Robbie Ashford in exchange for Bo Nix and I don't know, cash considerations. But I think Keon Ware-Hudson is a guy who probably is not going to be able to crack the starting rotation on the defensive line just because of the guys who are in front of him right now. But I was talking with John Garcia earlier, the director of recruiting for Sports Illustrated, who's great. I have him on my shows just about every week, and he does an awesome job breaking down, where guys are at in their timelines and all that sort of stuff. And we were talking about how, on the interior of the defensive line and on the offensive line too, you don't have big personalities as often. You don't have divas at those positions, right? It's more about show up, put your head down, work hard, and just kind of get to work. And I think that on the defensive line, you have that partially because, and guys are not quite as worried about playing time either, because those positions get rotated in and out pretty darn often, right? So maybe you're not playing the 30 snaps a game you would like to on defense. I don't even know what snap numbers are. I've never thought about them, frankly. But let's just say a standard one is, 30 for a defensive lineman in a game, and you'd like to be there, but you're, kind of in that second tier. You're still probably playing 20-ish snaps per game. So I think that even though there's a lot of talent in front of him, having some depth here, which I think Oregon definitely does, because Taimani is a guy who in the Pac-12 is more than talented enough to be one of your 2 starting interior defensive linemen, but he's probably not going to be. He's probably going to be a guy you rotate in. And at that position, you rotate bodies in a lot. I think Keon Ware-Hudson could have opportunities, but he's going to have to show it. I mean, Jordan Riley has played, I think this is going to be like his 6th season on a college campus playing football. And Casey Rogers played a good amount of defensive line. And then he's got Taimani, Dorless, and Almavai all in front of him as well. So I'm with you. The opportunity could be there, but I wouldn't pick that as, a lock for a guy who is going to see the field regularly, because I think there are just a lot of bodies in there who are going to compete for playing time.
Sure. No, I think that's a valid point. That room is super loaded with talent in the trenches. A couple other guys I just kind of had on my list here. One of them I actually didn't have, but I saw him in the comments for Mikey G. Trevin Mai. I think he's someone that they're looking to take that next step forward with. And a lot of these guys, I think you could put them on the breakout list, because for Oregon to take that next step, I think they need to go from having just depth, competent, like, good names that you can turn to, highly rated recruits, what have you, guys that have been around the program for a minute, to dependable depth. That guy that if someone goes down, you can sub the next guy in and you have no worry in the world that he's just going to match that level of play or even perhaps exceed it. And then if he exceeds it, maybe he should be in the conversation for, starting on the defense. But Trevin's is someone who was really athletic coming out of Bishop Gorman in high school. I think he was like 215, 220, kind of a little bit of a slider build on the edge. Well, fast forward to 2022, he's closer to 250 now. And he saw a lot of snaps last year under Tim DeRuyter's defense. So I think that you have some really good pieces at the edge right now with Braden Swinson and Mace Funa kind of looking like your main edge guys, DJ Johnson as well. But I think that Trevin has definitely proven that he should be in the mix there, and looking for him to take that next step. He's kind of like one of those gentle giant kind of guys, I guess. He's just, we've talked to him a handful of times, the reporters and I have, and he's really softly spoken, but looking for him to just go out there with some violent intentions on defense.
Yeah, and a couple names that should also be in this conversation when talking about the defensive line are our 2022 freshmen, and I don't expect to see a ton from Sir Mel's or Anthony Jones, but Jones is kind of a joker on defense to where he can play a little bit of anywhere, and I think fall camp is really going to show us or give us an indication about whether or not either of them could start seeing the field. But I like what you're saying about guys like Trevin Ma'ai to be somebody who's there in case somebody goes down, or just to sub out to spell a guy, right? Because you got to have those bodies who are there to support the guys ahead of them. Because a season ago with Thibodeau on the field, you always knew when he was on the field. But then if he had to come off for a play because of an injury, there was just this huge drop off. And that's why it's important to recruit, not just talented guys, but a depth of talented guys. You need to have players on your roster who can step up and, have that production drop off from the first to second stringers be at least minimal, or at least as minimal as possible. And I think Trevin Ma'ai is a name to follow as well.
Yeah, so we got Trevin Mai in the mix as well for a potential breakout guy. I want to stay with the linebackers for a bit because there are a couple names that I also had listed here that I wanted to make sure they got a mention, and that's Jackson LeDuc and Keith Brown. Jackson LeDuc has been at Oregon longer than Keith Brown has, but both those guys saw some snaps last year. Keith Brown saw some snaps in that Ohio State game because you'll remember that Oregon was a little thin on bodies after, oh my God, I'm totally blanking. Drew Mathis. There it is. Got hurt to start the season, so they kind of had to get creative. Brandon Buckner was another guy. I know I saw him get mentioned in the comments. I think he kind of gets swept under the rug a little bit because he is a little bit undersized, but he's someone who can kind of beat you with his technique, and he's super fundamentally sound. That tends to happen when you have an NFL dad coaching at the highest level. Shout out to Brenston Buckner. But I think that Brown's definitely someone who could be taking that next step. He was very highly sought after as a recruit. He was an All-American. And then Jackson LeDuc, I think that I liked what I saw from him because he was actually starting in the game down the stretch, I want to say. But in the postseason media availability, he was talking about how he not only had to recover from injury, but he also had a battle with COVID. So that's someone who's definitely been through a lot, whether it be injury or other factors that he's had to battle through. And I thought he's really one of those solid guys that Ken Wilson recruited out of the state of Nevada when he was still on the staff. And I think that he's definitely someone who could, make a case for some more snaps this year. And I think really help them go to that dependable depth level from just the dependable depth on that 2 deep.
Yeah, I liked Brown coming out of high school as well, and I still do. He's not as much of a speedster. I think he's a guy who plays very well in a short yardage situation. I think from a physical standpoint, he reminds me of Noah Sewell, but not quite as fast. Sewell can play sideline to sideline. I think Brown still has to work on that in a sense, but he's so big and he is just a really thick body. Like if a running back comes to meet him in the hole, he's going to be able to stand his ground. And I love the linebackers that are waiting in the wings for the Ducks once Sewell and Flowe move on, most likely both beyond after this year. Keith Brown is a name in the class of 2022. Devin Jackson is a name. Mace Funa could, he's an edge player technically now, but linebacker-ish. They're listing Jeffrey Bossa as an outside linebacker, who I'm a huge fan of. I'd like him more at strong safety, but I want to have him on the field regardless. So I think that Keith Brown's a guy that he got hurt in that Ohio State game, but he's somebody who, is capable of going out there, and I think just being rock solid. Harrison Taggart is another young linebacker name who will kind of be waiting in the wings here once Sewell and Flowe depart for the NFL after this season. But I think that, when attrition comes to your roster, and injuries happen every year, right? When we saw it last year, because for that Ohio State game, Drew Mathis got hurt and Justin Flowe got hurt. And that's why Keith Brown was on the field. And then in, what is only a sick joke by the football gods, Keith Brown goes into that game and gets hurt. And then the sicker joke was when Cam McCormick got hurt. That thing is just it's not funny, but it's laughable, as Mike Tomlin would say. Like, it's just ridiculous how bad Cam McCormick's luck has been. He's, of course, on the offensive side of the ball, but when you're talking about injuries, you'd just be remiss if you didn't talk about him, because he just has been through the ringer, and you hope he can stay healthy and make a couple big plays this year. But I feel really good about the linebackers now and in the future. It's not something I've talked about a ton on my show, because it's just been a position Oregon's recruited very well. I mean, Jeffrey Bossa is here for at least 2 more seasons, including this one. And then you got all the other guys that I was talking about. I think that the defensive line, the secondary are much bigger needs to address for Dan Lanning and the staff on the recruiting trail.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I would list Jeffrey Bossa here, but I feel like he kind of broke out last season as a true freshman, was definitely one of the biggest success stories of that defense from a year ago. Just 2 other guys quickly want to mention, because I know we're winding down here. Jamal Hill at safety. I think he could be in line for a bigger role this year. He really kind of came out, welcomed himself to the college football world in that sense against USC announced his arrival to college football in 2019 when he had those 2 interceptions. But he's been kind of quiet since those games a couple seasons ago. So I think that those are 2 other guys that could definitely be in the mix next year heavily in this defense.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And Gerard dropped a comment that said Harrison Taggart runs a 10.69 in the 100-meter dash, which is let's just say very, very fast for somebody who is that big. I don't know his time off the top of my head. I think Devin Jackson actually might be faster than Taggart. Both are speedsters, the linebacker position, but I'm very high on Devin Jackson. I can't wait until it's his turn to step up and be a linebacker for the Ducks, because I think he could be a really, really big time player.
Absolutely. So much talent on that Oregon defense. And those are just some of the guys that we think are poised to break out in a big way for Dan Lanning, Tosh Lapoy, Matt Powledge, and all those defensive staffers for Oregon. Before we get out of here, Spencer, where can people find more of you?
At Smalls_55 on Twitter. I also run the Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12 Twitter accounts. Those shows are available on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're about to go back in season, which means it will be daily content 5 days a week, and sometimes more maybe once the season gets rolling and whatnot. And I know that there are some people in the comments like Mikey G who listen to or watch you and support my shows as well. And I appreciate everybody out there. And Max, as always, it's good to hop on with you, my guy.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on, man. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me at mtorres sports right there on Twitter. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. If you guys are here on the live show, do me a huge favor, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on future live streams. And
one more thing. I got to toot my own horn here. Devin Jackson in the 100-meter, Gerard says is a 10.57. Like, sometimes I'm good. Sometimes, only sometimes, but sometimes I get it right.
There you go. All right. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't also plug my written publication. That is ducksdigest.com. And you can find the latest Oregon football and recruiting coverage over there, getting ready to ramp up with a lot of big visitors coming to town for Oregon this weekend as the dead period comes to a close. And then fall camp starting next week. So make sure you guys tap in for all the latest in Oregon football and recruiting. That'll do it for us on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.